2. He was floating in a place that was not quite the world of wind, wood, and stone. It was a countryside that resided next to the land he normally knew, and infused the world he had been born into. This place was not unlike the air surrounding the earth. This was how Lear had come to think of the spirit world. He could see the shadows of objects that truly existed, and he knew that his body lay inside some kind of cell or cage, for he intuited that the vertical shadows that encircled him must be bars. He paced back and forth, seeking to find an escape. He found none. An annoying and familiar male voice asked Lear, "Got yourself captured again? You are becoming quite adept at that. Do you like being a slave?" Lear growled. He turned within the boundaries of his cage and faced the spirit. Or perhaps it was a ghost, perhaps even a god, and snarled at it. The being appeared like a well-muscled man who was wearing a leather kilt and high boots. The man's long red beard was bound with cords, and his hair hung loosely behind him. The spirit held a club, which at first seemed a primitive and crude choice of weapon, yet the weapon had evidence of civilized arts, for one end of the club was capped in iron and the other in copper. "Go away, unhelpful dream," Lear shouted at it, for he knew it to be the same mocking voice that had teased him in the barrow he had fallen into. It was difficult for Lear to formulate his thoughts in the manner of a man. He had blissfully been a wolf thing these past few months, and would have remained so had not the Aesir come hunting. "You are the one who is dreaming. You called me. Now I see why. Clearly you have no idea what you are doing and are only going to get yourself killed. Maybe your people would have been better off if they let your mother strangle you as she wished," mocked the spirit. The jibe hit a sensitive spot in Lear's soul. Fractured memories of betrayal by the woman Branwen flashed in his mind. These mingled with memories of his homeland and how the Dun had ostracized him. The wolf thing of his heart wished to flee the uncomfortable memories. Yet enough of a man remained in Lear's soul that he felt he must justify himself. He recalled the battle with the Picts in which he had saved Deirdre. He remembered the flight from the Picts alongside the women. He relived the spear battle with Hochganuk. And the parting with Shyle. A conviction of self-worthiness, long absent in him, flared up. "I am loyal," Lear growled. He was becoming more man-like by the moment. Lear had never been handsome, nor charismatic, nor he'd ever been what Cimmerians considered strong. Loyalty was the only virtue he possessed that Cimmerians admired. "So loyal that you arranged the murder of your kinswomen, so that one of their number might supplant another. So loyal that you did not escort your kinswomen back to safety. So loyal that you have been hiding in these woods, pretending like a child to be a dog," the spirit challenged. Lear had no sufficient answer to the cutting attack. It required more cognizant ability than he could currently direct. Yet the spirit was expecting a response. He thought of Branwen's dead eyes looking up at him as he mauled her corpse. He remembered how she and her coiterie had pushed him to what should have been his own death, and how he had felt worthless because of their betrayal. "I was wrong. What I did. But they would have let her go. She had to pay," Lear snarled. The spirit held out its club towards Lear and placed it sideways. It asked Lear, "With this end, I strike at foes and slay them. With this end, I touch the wounded and heal them. Life and death, proper and improper, right and wrong, are all two sides of the stave. Easy it is to mistake them for being the only options a man has to him. Tell me, boy, where does one hold on to the stave?" "The middle," Lear replied, though he did not understand why the spirit was asking him this. "Exactly. Remember that when next you are faced with such a grave decision. Then we will see whether you be a man or a wretch," the spirit bid him. Then it faded from his sight while laughing. The shadows gained solidity and were indeed revealed to be the bars of a cage. The world of his birth was reclaiming Lear's spirit. He realized that his soul had been pacing in circles inside a small space. His prison was made of well-forged iron bars, that were driven into a bed of wooden planks. It was an animal cage that hunters used to trap and transport big game. The cattle that would haul the cart lulled nearby, and Lear heard a dog barking. His ears also heard several voices whimpering, not unlike wolves do when they are hurt or frightened. Lear's eyes scanned for those who were calling for comfort. Wolves do not leave pack members in trouble. His gaze fell to several women who were chained to posts that had been driven into the ground. Their arms were suspended above their heads, and strong ropes secured them to their personal roods. The women were dressed in a similar style to the Aesir men that Lear saw moving about the camp. Subtle differences, and their mane of trepidation, revealed to Lear that the women were not related to the Aesir. One of the women had long, curly red hair that fascinated him. He had never seen someone with red hair before. Seeing that the women were also captives, Lear turned his mind to escape. The cage smelled of tar and smoke. Lear tested the bars and tried to pry them out. He thought he felt one of them give slightly. He was prevented from prying out the bar by a smack of a club that rattled the bars of the cage. Lear shrank back from the edge and growled at the Aesir outside of his cell. The Aesir was the same tall and muscle-bound man that had rendered Lear unconscious. He had curly hair, and his blond locks waved in the air. Taller than Lear by a head, the man looked to be bored and seeking a diversion. He gained his amusement by striking the bars of the cage and watching Lear reflexively scuttle backward. A cruel smile arose underneath the man's mustache and above his short beard. "Awake, are you? You made dog noises in your sleep." There were some words that sounded like Southerner speech, but it was all a bitch's whining to me, the Aesir taunted Lear. Lear looked around for his metal fang, but it had been taken from him. He had nothing with which to fight the man should the Aesir attempt to kill him. "Not true. You have teeth," Lear thought to himself. He bared his weapons at the man and was pleased to see the man lose a bit of his bravado. "You are not play-acting. You truly are a madman. Well, perhaps Sildar will have some mercy on you," the Aesir remarked. Then he walked away from Lear's cage and to an Aesir who was preparing a stew over a small fire. Lear's gaze followed the man's path. The Aesir were all well armed. Each man wore a dagger on his hip along with another weapon. Most favored a longsword, but here and there Lear witnessed a man with an axe or a mace. Each had a large round shield that seemed impractical to Lear in these alpine conditions. Even the archers rested by a pair of large, round shields that were painted with writing in the script of the Aesir. Lear knew the inscriptions were Nordheimer writing, and was aware that he should understand it, yet at the moment he found he could not interpret them. Uncertainty and frustration welled up in his spirit. The Aesir were busy bragging about their hunting deeds, either past or current, to one another by the cook fires. The men ate meat along with some vegetables they had either found or dried for the trail. The odor of the roasting meat rankled in Lear's nose. He wondered what they had brought down. An injured or aged deer, perhaps? He glanced around the camp, looking for the source of the men's meal. He screamed. His high-pitched keening brought all eyes, both the Aesir and their captives, to rest on his cage. Lear had spied the racks near the edge of the camp, upon which wolf skins were stretched to dry. 8 skins were splayed upon the racks, 8 members of Lear's pack that would run no more. A part of his mind was relieved to realize that the alphas and the pups had escaped. The skins were those of packmates that had gotten between the hunters and the pups to defend them. "Ah, the little wolf boy misses his mummy," teased one of the Aesir. The men laughed, and one of them threw a bone at Lear's cage. Lear's keening transformed into a growl, and he glared at the men around the fire, his gaze promising death. But the armored Aesir were not intimidated. Civilization, even the barbaric kind that Southerners believed the Aesir to possess, had dulled the men's wits. They believed that simply because Lear was safely in a cage now, that he was no threat to them in the future. One of the Aesir finished his meal and wiped his hands on a cloth. Then he rose and approached one of the women who was chained to a stake. He stroked her cheek and said something to her that Lear did not catch. Then he pulled up the woman's dress and proceeded to molest her. The Aesir's hands roamed along her body freely while she squirmed. She began to weep as he pinched her sensitive places. Memories of having to hear women whimper in pain from Pictish abuse came back to Lear. He remembered a face and a name, Grania. Others flitted before his mind as more of his human mind began to assert itself. He managed to form a human curse in the Cimmerian tongue. He shouted, "Bastard!" The Aesir paused. As Lear continued to rage against the bars, they regarded him now with mixed appraisal. "Well, he's not mute," Joti commented. "I don't get why he's upset. It's not like the woman is his kin. She's just a Vanir thrall," Aefilgar mumbled. "Oh, I think he's lonely. Let's give him some company," said Ullin. The Aesir all shouted affirmatively. They stalked over and unhooked a different red-headed woman from her stake. Rough hands stripped off her dress, and a few of the Aesir took the opportunity to fondle her breasts and hips. Then they drug her to the cage cart. One of the men forced Lear back from the door of the cage with a spear. Then they tossed the frightened woman into the cage with the wild man. She huddled against the bars of the cage, as far from Lear as she could. She babbled at him in a language he did not know. He approached her slowly, and she squealed. Her hands scrambled in the straw for a weapon or a rock, but there were none. She was at his mercy. Finally, she balled up her hands into fists, and keeping her back to the cage, she prepared to strike him. He lowered his face near her and sniffed the air. Her scent was similar to that of the hunters, but he could smell a bit of sea salt in her hair. The sea is far away. She was there not long ago, he thought. He stared at her red hair. His hands approached her tresses slowly, and he petted them in his palm. He thought, her hair curls. Fair skin, sea salt smell, red hair. I know her people. Their eyes met, and he whispered a word he had heard long ago. Vanir? She nodded. Yes, Cimmerian. She's a daughter of your hated foes. What will you do to her now that she is naked and under your power? Eat her up? Devour her? The blond men teased. Other hunters had gathered and were watching expectantly. What did they expect of him? From the looks of their faces, they seemed to expect blood to be spilt. Why would I eat her? Do they mean to starve us? Lear asked himself. Go on, Cimmerian, take your revenge on her, one of the hunters said. The word reminded him of something bloody. He saw female faces staring back at him blankly. He repeated the word. Revenge, he growled. The hunters were startled. Lear's voice had not sounded like something that should issue from a human throat. Yes, take her. Make her cry out. Make her hurt, another of the hunters cried. Lear growled at them. He turned to look again at the woman. He approached her and she tried to punch him. He slipped away from her attack and seized her. She was sobbing now, as well as screaming. He was not sure why. The hunters all cheered him on. He pinned the girl's arms and turned her so that her back was to him. Then he laid them both down on the floor of the cage. He kept himself between the hunter's view and the girl. The hunters' cheering stopped. They watched expectantly for something he could not fathom. Woman, no cry. Woman, safe, he growled in heavily slurred Nordheimer near her ear. Her sobbing ceased, and it was clear she did not know what to do next. She lay there as expectantly as the others. Aw, he just wants to cuddle, a hunter teased. Please, Mommy, may I have my dolly? Teased another. He must be shy. Come on, lads, let's give the wolf boy his privacy, said the leader. Then the hunters filed away to amuse themselves with other delights. In the distance, Lear could smell the fermentation of ale and hear the rattling of dice. He stroked the girl's arms in hopes it would calm her. Eventually, she turned inside the embrace of his arms and faced him. Her face was becoming harder to see in the dying light. She asked him something again in her native speech, but he could not understand her. They were now effectively alone, and could not hide from the awkward intimacy of the situation. The night marched on, and they remained huddled against one another. As the evening cooled, Lear felt her arms pull him to her for warmth. Their captors had not given them a blanket. She shivered a little and tried to press against him. He allowed her to do so, for it reminded him of something in his past. He felt her trace his cheek with her palm, and her lips touched his. "No," he growled. "Please, please, it's all right. I wish to lay with you," she whispered. "No, no," Lear stammered. His body tensed due to the frustration that he could not find the words he knew he had learned long ago. Words that would explain the emotions, so long unfelt and troubling, that he was afflicted with. The Vanayar had no way to know what he had suffered, and mistook his protest for a crude chivalry. She pleaded, "Please, tomorrow they are going to take me out of this cage. Then that lout, Sildar, will have me for his and his fellow's sport. So before I might be tortured into losing my mind, please, let me have one moment I choose to have." When she said the words, "I choose," her appearance in his vision flickered. Her skin became green, her hair stark white, with yellow eyes like his own, looked back at him with love and acceptance. He closed his eyes and tried not to remember her, for it hurt so very, very much. "Always," Lear thought he heard Shiles say. The Vanayar's lips met his again, and without thinking about it, he responded to her needs. She was amazed to find his touch was gentle, and that his gaze had something inside of it she could relate to. The woman realized that what she had intuited in the wild man was loss. Sorrow lay behind the wild man's eyes, sorrow so great he was running away from it. The Vanayar made him look into her eyes as they coupled. When pleasure overtook her, she was holding his gaze. Tears leaked out of her eyes then, and the wild man Lear paused. She stroked his face. "I'm all right," she whispered. "I'm all right. Go on." Then she clutched at his hips so he would know she meant for him to continue. It took him far longer than she had expected to finish, and her pleasure overcame her again before Lear's overtook him. When he was finished, she held him close and felt him shake. "Always," he growled, his body and his voice filled with loss. "Always." "Hold it," for that was the Vanayar's name, drew him fast and did not release her hold on him, as together they mourned. When Lear awoke, he was alone in the cage. He heard sounds of men shouting encouragement to one another. He looked and saw that the Asir had tied Hulda and some of the other women to the stakes they had driven into the ground. The women's hands were lashed to the poles, and they were forced to lean their shoulders against them while they were bent over. Behind the women, the Asir took their sport. As Lopt, the Asir, raped her, Hulda's eyes met Lear's gaze. Her face was expressionless and blank. Lear's hands touched the bars of his cage, and he was about to throw himself forward in a foolish attempt to spare her the abuse and humiliation. But she shook her head ever so slightly, and he relented to her wishes. It would do her no good for him to attract the men's attention. When the Asir were finished with their morning sport, they let the women alone to weep and whimper. As Lopt passed by Lear's cage, Lear growled at the man. "Let them clean themselves," Lear growled. "Oh, it speaks," Lopt teased. "If you want the women to be well, you must let them clean themselves," Lear said. "Oh, and what do you know of women? Do you share their genitals?" the Asir asked. "I am a healer," Lear growled. "Sure, and I am the Jarl of all Asgard," the man roared. "We've been marching slaves for ages, boys. We need no help from you. You are kept only because Sildar thinks that you are a novelty. He may be convinced that you are some kind of shaman, but you don't fool me. Fleas and lice are your only creatures to command." "Fleas, lice," Lear growled softly. He bit his thumb until some of his own blood welled up from his skin. This blood he used to paint a strange line near his own lips. "What are you doing?" Lopt asked. Lear merely smiled at the man. Truthfully, he was not sure that this sudden inspiration would work. In his mind, he reached out to the hundreds of crawling things that men fail to notice. The woods, even these high alpine forests, were filled with small insects going about their lives in the underbrush and in the folds of trees. It was only a matter of time for Lear to locate a place where insects were scuttling about nearby. He gave them Lopt's face, Lopt's voice, and Lopt's scent. Then he added the concept of nest to these images. Lear's glassy gaze faded, and he watched Lopt's expression. "You're insane," Lop said. Lear merely smiled. And a quarter of an hour later, a large man with a long blond beard approached Lear's cage. He bore in his hands the ancient Atlantean spearhead that Lear had taken from the hall of King Kalen and Queen Mela. Where did you find this, boy? The man asked. It was a gift, Lear growled. From your father, your ancestors, you mean? The man asked. From the one who used it in battle, from she for who it was made. One regal and kind, and worth more than 10 of you in war, Lear snarled. That's not possible, boy. This weapon is ancient. It is of a kind I have sought for many years along this ridge. I would search the coasts, but the Vanir are too thick there. Now try again. Where did you find this? The man said. The dead are kind to those that are willing to honor them, Lear retorted. Ah, the man said. I think I see. You found it in a barrow and hallucinated that the body gave it to you. The Picts must have broken your mind. I see some of their scroll work in the spearhead and on your skin. The Picts taught me many things, Lear chortled. Ask Lopt. The blond man tilted his head in curiosity. But missing the remark, the man continued. I am Sildar, the leader of this band. I am a Gothi. Do you know what that is? Lear searched his memory. He replied, A Derwood. I suppose it's not unalike. I speak to the gods for my people. The gods gave me a dream. In it they showed me a place where a woman ruled as a queen. She was a great craftsman and blacksmith, and taught the secrets of this, he held up the spearhead, metal making to her sons and daughters. We came to find her tomb and take the secret. Yet then I find you, a man marked by the gods. Sildar pointed to Lear's eyes. Tell me, how came you by them? Sildar asked. Rising from Sildar's shadow, and the earth that was her gown, the red-headed phantom goddess appeared in Lear's vision. She shook her head and motioned for Lear to keep silent. She was afraid for Lear's safety should he speak of how he came to possess his yellow eyes. Yet Lear sensed that if he did not tell Sildar something, the man might exact revenge upon the women he had captured. It would be in keeping with these men's low character that Lear had seen demonstrated. Sildar and his men liked to abuse others to get what they wanted. So Lear decided to tell the best kind of lie. That is, one that has truth mixed with its falsehood. The Pictish shaman, Hochganuk, did something to me. But I escaped, Lear told him. Ah, Sildar said, sensing the truth of the words. That explains much. Even in the north we have heard of this Hochganuk and his growing skill in deviltry. How did you escape? One night the Cimmerian women broke loose. While they attacked the camp, I fled, Lear partially lied. He did not think it prudent to inform Sildar that he had helped lead the escape attempt, the flight, and had slain Hochganuk in a duel. Such information could only make his opponents wary and limit his chances to escape. Why did you not aid your kinswomen? Sildar asked. They despise me, Lear said. This was partly the truth. He pointed to his eyes as a deception, implying that it was due to the Pict's sorcery. The Cimmerian distrust of sorcery was well known. I see, said Sildar. The Aesir considers something. Then asked Lear, So you have no need to return to your snowy hills, then? I had meant to live here with my pack. Until you slew them, Lear growled on the last part. You are not a wolf, Sildar replied. Why not? Wolves are more honest and kind company than men. Wolves do not rob and murder each other, nor make slaves of others, Lear snarled. Sildar nodded. He replied, Yes, that is true. But I assure you we Aesir only make slaves of the weak, so we might protect them from their own folly. The Vanir in particular, with their customs of robbery and raiding, are better off as slaves so the world can be made safe from their evil. By committing evil on them in turn? How noble. Why, one wonders why they could dare be so ungracious to you, their liberator that places them in chains, Lear retorted. It is strange. You look like a Cimmerian, you smell like a Pict, and you speak like a Nemedian Stoic. I'm not quite sure what to make of that mixture. But it is clear that you cannot remain a slave. Like all Cimmerians, you won't submit. At least, not for yourself. Sildar replied. The Aesir's eyes slid towards Hulda, who was still lashed to the post. Ulf was prodding at her with his fingers and teasing her about how, at times, she had involuntarily cried out during the abuse she had suffered. I saw how the two of you touched last night. It was moving, Sildar insinuated. I doubt you have a heart that can be moved, Lear growled. Perhaps my heart has been hardened by my duty, but yours is still young and believes in love. I can hear it in your words and see it in the tension of your frame. Give me your word that you will obey my orders and become my bondsman, and I will order that no woman amongst them be molested the rest of this trek, Sildar offered. Lear glanced at the goddesses that appeared to watch the scene. She placed her hands over her heart in a motion that meant, take more. Lear searched his memory for what he had been taught about the Aesir by his uncle Kinnaid. Amongst your men, it is death to interfere with another man's wife, is it not? Lear guessed. Why, yes. How'd you know that? Sildar asked. Marry me to that one, and I will be your bondsman, Lear counter-offered, while pointing at Hulda. Sildar's eyebrows rose and he showed surprise. Well, clever one, aren't you? That would make all these women, as they were kin to her, your kin, and allow you to speak for them all. You would be a bondsman, a status better than a slave by a slight share, and they would have to obey you but be released from their bondage. The price you ask is too high. Then you risk my sorceress ire, Lear spat. Please, you are a Cimmerian. Ask. Lopped, Lear said with great emphasis. Sildar rose, his nervousness clear on his face. He left Lear in the makeshift cage and glanced back once, wondering what it was he had trapped. When Sildar returned, it was with Lopt at his heels. The hands of Lopt had been tied into mittens. He had already scratched himself so vigorously that there were gouges of flesh missing from his scalp, his arms, and Lear suspected his inner thighs. Break the spell, Sildar demanded. Give me my due, Lear challenged. Ulf, Sildar called. My thane, Ulf replied in the distance. Put an arrow in one of the women, in her gut so she can die slowly, Sildar called. Do it, and I'll make them bite him deeper, as well as infest the rest of you, Lear promised. Now, Ulf, Sildar commanded. There was a twang of a bowstring, and a Vanir woman screamed in pain as the shaft nearly buried itself in her stomach. As it was, the arrow creased her side and opened a shallow cut. She twisted behind her post, trying to place something between her and her tormentors. In response, Lear closed his eyes and imagined the taste of blood on his tongue. Lopt screamed, and his mittened hands flew to his head and his groin as he tried to pat away the insects. A dark covering of lice and abnormally large woodland fleas increased their biting. I can kill more slaves, Sildar told the Cimmerian. I can bewitch more men, Lear replied. I can have you killed, Sildar said. Do so, and every animal in the forest will turn against you. You cannot kill them all, Lear said with a laugh. It was a lie, but one well crafted. Sildar drew water from his belt and made a religious sign in front of Lear. He began chanting to his gods for power. But Lear could already sense that Sildar had no sorcery nor divine grace within him. It was doubtlessly true that Sildar believed in the rites he had been taught, and it was probably true that at times he had prophetic dreams. But breaking a curse was not within Sildar's skill. Lear made a hand motion and envisioned another of Sildar's men. The insects jumped from Lop and began a visible exodus towards Elfgar. The man backed away from them. All right, Sildar roared. Lear clenched his fists and the insects stopped. He imagined them at rest in their plants and trees. Slowly the lice walked away, and the fleas and biting flies hopped or flew along with them. Murmurs could be heard from the Aesir, begging Ymir and Tyr to protect them. Lopt was openly crying in relief that his pain was finally ceasing. Get my new bondsman out of the cage, Sildar muttered. The women, Lear reminded Sildar. And no more bothering the women. Bring me that red-headed slattern, the one called Hulda. Sildar commanded. She was dragged from her lashing post with little gentility and forced to stand by Sildar. Sildar took out a 3-inch wide steel ring from his belt and showed it to her. Place your hand on the ring, Sildar commanded. Nervously, Hulda did so. Then Sildar motioned for Lyr to do the same. When the Cimmerian complied, Sildar spoke. In the sight of Frege and Freja, who govern these matters, you are bound. Speak that you give your oath to one another, and none shall break it. Hulda's expression became one of utter shock. I so swear, said Lyr. I, Hulda stammered. I so swear, she finally managed. Let none come between this man and his wife, nor harm their kin, Sildar declared. Then Sildar said to Lyr, But you will obey my commands, you and all this new house of yours. Lyr replied, I accept. We need an hour to be sure my kin can journey. You had better be worth this sacrifice, Cimmerian, said Sildar. Then it occurred to the man that he did not even know his bondsman's name. He asked, What do we call you? Lyr, the Cimmerian replied. Well, Lyr with the crow-like eyes, your first command is to get your kin ready in an hour for the journey north, Sildar commanded. Once the Aesir were gone, Lyr turned to Hulda. She waited for his explanation. Forgive me my assumptions, but it was the only way I could think of to keep you safe. We can sunder the bond later when we are free of these men and back in your native. It was an oath sworn to the gods. It cannot be sundered, Hulda said. Oh, Lyr replied. It had not occurred to him that other peoples were less practical than Cimmerians. Being practical, the Cimmerians did not demand that a man and a woman remain together if it was clear they were incompatible. So what would you order me to do, husband? Hulda dared him. He did not miss the anger that was latent in her words, nor could he fathom why she was offended. We need hot water and soap root. Your kin need to wash their, parts vigorously and fully. There is no telling where these offal have been or when they last bathed. For all we know, they've been screwing sheep or each other. We have no way to prevent disease, and we must alleviate any discomfort from them. Lyr didn't wish to say it, but he felt he must. Rape of our kin. They have not been your kin for more than a few minutes, Hulda spat. Lyr gawked at her. He asked, Why are you angry with me? It was bad enough when I had slave takers ordering me about. Now I have a pretentious husband. Don't cloak your manipulations in care, Hulda snarled. Woman, you advanced on me last night, not the other way around, Lyr retorted. I thought I was destined to die, and now I wish that perhaps I had. What kind of man are you that makes a deal with his enemies? You could fight them. You claim you can bewitch them. Why don't you do so? You are not a man. You're not even much of a lay, simpering and crying over your lost love. I bet she only pity-fucked you like I did, because she was convinced she was going to die as well. What woman would ever want you? Hulda harangued him. Then she pushed Lyr away. It wasn't Lyr that she was truly angry with. It was the men who had carried her off and subjected her to shame that she despised. She had been raped, and her rage from the violation needed a target. But the Aesir men were well armed, and her unarmed husband was right in front of her. You are worthless and vile, Hulda screamed. She slapped the Cimmerian. Then she did it again and again, shrieking as she assaulted him. She had no way to know if the abuse Lyr had suffered at the hands of his mother and tribe. Hulda could not have known how she was acting exactly like the parent who had abused him. In his fragile emotional state, Lyr defaulted to doing what had always made the beating stop. He sheltered his head behind his arms and silently endured the abuse. That he wouldn't fight back enraged Hulda all the more, and she battered him continuously. Lyr backpedaled, confused and ashamed. His thoughts of all that had happened to him, images disjointed and confusing, took on new meanings. He felt the rejection of Hulda's blows more keenly than he ever had his mother's. He had no way to know that this agitation was a side effect of the sorcery he had been exposed to. For animals do not reflect, they only feel. Now all Lear could feel was confusion, shame, loss. The disapproval of one's pack is horrible for a wolf. He concluded that Hulda must be correct. He had failed and was worthless. He assumed the behaviors of an Omega wolf he had lived with. His face cast downward to the ground as Hulda continued her haroog and battering of her husband. The Aesir witnessed this and laughed at the sight as Hulda continued. One of the Aesir muttered, "The wizard isn't even man enough to stand up to her." And as the men roared at the jest, Hulda dared him, "Go on, prove it. Prove you have something of a spine. Make me stop if you be a man." The situation was a familiar one to Lear, so he responded in the way he always had. Like a whipped child, he murmured, "I will go get the herbs we need. I shall return shortly." With that, Lear vanished into the woods. Hulda could not see them, but the trio of godly fetches that followed Lear's life scowled at her. They felt no mercy towards her, for they mightily disapproved of what she had just done to the only man amongst the troop that cared about a woman's well-being. When Lear returned to the camp a little less than half an hour later, he did not speak to anyone. The herbs he carried were laid on a sheet. He used a bowl and a stone as an improvised mortar and pestle. Quickly and angrily he beat out the herbs. In his inner vision he was reliving Deirdre's disapproval of him. He heard Rion's laughing taunts. These memories mixed with the Pictish prodding and abuse he had suffered, as well as his mother's constant disdain. He was almost completely unaware of his surroundings, lost in the task of making the remedy. His fears had come to pass. 2 of the women the Aesir had raped were indeed in pain. They described their sensations as a burning sensation in their loins. Without a word to Hulda, Lear passed her by and carried the remedy to the campfire. There he steeped in herbal tea and then brought it to the afflicted women first. The curative had 2 components. First, the tea to prevent further infections, and second, a salve that had to be applied to alleviate the pain. "Drink. Slowly. It is hot," he said in choppy sentences. His Nordheimer was sufficient, but he didn't wish to chance being misunderstood. Then he gave the women some of the salve each and explained how they should apply it to themselves. He turned away so they could do so in privacy, and informed them that he would need to check on their progress later. His fear now was that the unwashed men had caused an infection in the women's genitals, that if left untreated would spread to their organs. It might even now be too late, but the women were young and healthy. Hopefully he had gotten them aid in time. The humanity he had recovered during the night's absence from the mark of Jebel Sog was now subdued. He felt like he was a child again, and that he could never please anyone or do anything correctly. He treated all the women to the cup, but when it came time for Hulda to drink, he handed the tea in its bowl to a Vanayar to give to Hulda in his stead. He turned his back on her and walked away like a beaten dog. "Can't even face me, coward!" Hulda called. He stifled the growl that wanted to escape his throat. A thought whispered in his mind, a thought not of words but of fur and body warmth. "Wolves never abused you like this. Only men, only women. You are not made for the world of men. Shia loved you, but she was not human. Maybe you are not meant to be a man." But he shook the thought away as more of his memory returned. He remembered the hall where he had sworn an oath before a pair of ancient monarchs. "But if I am not a man, who will tell King Kaelin and Queen Mela's story? Who will be their bard? They let me have the spear because I promised. I made an oath to them as surely as I made an oath to this shrew," Lear thought. The forest edge seemed to beckon. He could easily sneak away. A ghostly hand touched his shoulder. It was the wave and sea foam covered goddess. Tenderly she reminded him of what he had promised to do, and Cimmerians are not oath breakers. "Fuck!" Lear hissed softly.